Have you ever been so deep in a movie or a book that the world around you just disappears? Or maybe you've felt a real gut punch of sadness for a character you know isn't even real. Well, we're going to get into that, because today we are unpacking the science of why stories have this incredible, almost magical hold on our brains. So this quote, it's from a neuroscientist, Paul Zak, and he's on a plane watching the movie Million Dollar Baby, and he just loses it. Now, the scientist part of his brain knew, right? He knew it was just actors, it's just light and sound. But his body, his brain, they reacted like something terrible was happening to someone he knew. It was this deep, physical response to something he was totally aware was fiction. And that experience really got him and a lot of other researchers asking this one central question. Why? Why do good stories have this undeniable power to make us feel and to make us believe and even to make us act? And it's not just a fuzzy feeling, it's something we can actually measure. Yeah, that feeling Dr. Zank had on the plane is not a one-off. There is some serious data behind this. The persuasive power of a good story is a consistent, measurable thing. And the best way to see this is through something called a meta-analysis. Okay, so a meta-analysis is basically a study of studies. Researchers named Braddock and Dillard took dozens of different experiments on story-based persuasion, and they mashed all the results together to find the real pattern. And this is so important because, a single study can be a fluke, but when you combine dozens of them, you start to see the real truth emerge from all that statistical noise. And here it is. This is the first huge takeaway. Stories have a real, measurable, persuasive effect. Looking at thousands of people across all these studies, there was a consistent positive shift. Stories actually changed people's beliefs, their attitudes, their intentions to do something, and this is the wild part, their actual real-world behaviors. And what's so wild about this is just how consistent the effect is. I mean, look at those numbers. Whether a story is changing a belief or an attitude or even a behavior, the impact is remarkably stable. It's not this huge tidal wave in any one case, but it's reliable. Stories are constantly nudging us in the direction they're pointing. So the next question has to be, how? So we know stories can persuade us, but how do they do it? How do they sneak past our natural skepticism? That little voice that goes off when we see an ad or hear a political speech? Well, the secret is this really cool psychological state. It's called narrative transportation. And you know this feeling. It's when you're so absorbed that you forget you're on your couch and you feel like you're right there with the characters. When a story can pull this off, it totally changes how our brain takes in information. And this lays it out perfectly. When we're in our analytical mind, our defenses are way up. We're looking for holes in the argument. We're fighting back in our heads. But when a story transports us, our defenses just drop. We stop analyzing and we start feeling. We connect, we get immersed, and we become way more open to the ideas that are woven into that story. But there's something even crazier going on under the hood. Okay, now we're going to go even deeper, right down to the level of neurochemistry. What is physically happening inside your brain when you are captivated by a story? Well, it turns out your brain is getting flooded with a very specific and very powerful cocktail of chemicals. So a good story basically hijacks our brain chemistry in 3 steps. First, you've got tension or conflict. That releases cortisol, which makes us pay attention. Bam, we're hooked. Then, as the plot gets juicy, our brain releases dopamine. That helps us focus and remember what's happening. And finally, when we connect with the characters, their struggles, their wins, our brain releases oxytocin. That's the empathy hormone. It makes us feel trust and connection. This chemical reaction is so powerful that it can actually be synced up across a huge audience. In one study, they showed people a classic Alfred Hitchcock thriller and found that brain activity was synchronized in over 65% of the cortex across every single viewer. Think about that. The director was literally conducting their brains, creating a shared neurological event. And it gets even crazier. This leads to something called neural coupling. Using brain scans, scientists found that as someone tells a story, the listener's brain patterns actually start to mirror the storyteller's. The same parts of the brain light up in the same order. So this is the key. It's not just a cute metaphor anymore. When we're locked into a story, our brains are literally syncing up. We are on the same wavelength. The patterns of our neurons firing become almost identical. It's the closest we can come to actually sharing an experience with another person. And that leads us to the final and maybe the most mind-bending idea of them all. Okay, so we've looked at the data, the psychology, and the neuroscience. But the true power of a story goes way beyond just persuasion. It's about how we build our entire understanding of the world. So back in 1991, this incredibly influential psychologist and philosopher, Jerome Bruner, he published this paper. And in it, he argued something pretty radical, that narrative isn't just how we talk about reality. It's one of the main ways we actually create it. What Bruner argued is that for a story to feel true, it doesn't need to be fact-checked against the real world. It just needs what he called narrative necessity. In other words, does it feel right? Does it make sense within its own world? If the story hangs together, we accept it as true on its own terms. And this is the real mic drop. Narrative isn't just for fun. It is a fundamental mode of human thought. We use stories to organize the complete chaos of our daily experience into something that makes sense. You could say it's the operating system our brain uses to process reality. So let's just trace that path one more time. We saw that stories have a real, measurable power to persuade us. They do it by transporting us, which lowers our mental defenses. And that process is driven by a powerful chemical cocktail that literally syncs our brain up with the storytellers. And at the deepest level, these stories aren't just describing our world. They are the very blueprints we use to build it. Which leaves us with one last big question. If it's true, if the stories we consume, and more importantly, the stories we tell, are the fundamental building blocks of our reality, what kind of world are you building with yours?